Chapter 4 Cape Horn. Wednesday, November 5th. The weather was fine during the previous night, and we had a clear view of the Magellan Clouds and the Southern Cross. The Magellan Clouds consist of three small nebulae in the southern part of the heavens, two bright, like the Milky Way, and one dark. They are first seen just above the horizon, soon after crossing the southern tropic. The Southern Cross begins to be seen at 18 degrees north, and when off Cape Horn is nearly overhead. It is composed of four stars in that form across, and is one of the brightest constellations in the heavens. During the first part of this day, Wednesday, the wind was light, but after noon it came on fresh, and we furled the royals. We still kept the studding sails out, and the captain said he should go round with them if he could. Just before 8 o'clock, then about sundown in that latitude, the cry of "All hands ahoy!" was sounded down the fore scuttle and the after hatchway. Hurrying upon deck, we found a large black cloud rolling on toward us from the southwest and darkening the whole heavens. "Here comes Cape Horn!" And the chief mate and we had hardly time to haul down and clew up before it was upon us. In a few minutes a heavier sea was raised than I had ever seen, and the little brig plunged into it. All the forward part of her was under water, and the sea pouring in, threatening to wash everything overboard. In the lee scoopers it was up to a man's waist. We sprang aloft and double reefed the topsails, furled the other sails, and made all snug. But this would not do. The brig was laboring and straining against the head sea, and the gale was growing worse and worse. At the same time, sleet and hail was driving with all fury against us. Throughout the night it stormed violently, rain, hail, snow, and sleet beating upon the vessel. The wind continued ahead and the sea running high. At daybreak, about 3 a.m., the deck was covered with snow. The captain sent up the steward with a glass of grog to each of the watch, and all the time that we were off the Cape grog was given to the morning watch. And to all hands whenever we reefed topsails. The clouds cleared away at sunrise, and the wind becoming more fair, and we again made sail and stood nearly up to our course. Thursday, November 6th. It continued more pleasant through the first part of the day, but at night we had the same scene over again. This time we did not heave to as on the night before, but endeavored to beat to windward under close reefed topsails, balance reefed trysail, and foretopmast top staysail. This night it was my turn to steer, or as sailors say, my trick at the helm, for 2 hours. Inexperienced as I was, I made out to steer to the satisfaction of the officer, and neither Stimson nor I gave up our tricks all the time we were off the Cape. This was something to boast of, for it requires a good deal of skill and watchfulness to steer a vessel close hauled in a gale of wind against heavy head sea. Ease her when she pitches is the word, and little carelessness is letting her ship a heavy sea might sweep the decks, or take a mast out of her. Wow. Friday, November 7th. Towards morning the wind went down, and during the whole forenoon, we lay tossing about in a dead calm and in the midst of a thick fog. The calms here are unlike those in most parts of the world. The calms here are unlike those in most parts of the world. For here there is generally so high a sea running through with periods of calm so short that it has no time to go down, and vessels being under no command of sails or rudder lie like logs upon the water. We were obliged to steady the blooms and yards by guys and braces, and to lash everything well below. The calm of the morning reminds me of a scene which I forgot to describe at the time of its occurrence, but which I remember from its being the first time that I had heard the near breathing of whales. It was on the night that we passed between the Falkland Islands and Staten Islands. We had the watch from 12 to 4, and coming upon deck, found the little brig lying perfectly still, enclosed in a thick fog, and the sea as smooth as though oil had been poured upon it. Yet now and then a long low swell rolling under its surface, slightly lifting the vessel, but without breaking the glassy smoothness of the water. We were surrounded far and near by shoals of sluggish whales and grampuses, which the fog prevented our seeing, rising slowly to the surface or perhaps lying out at length, heaving out those lazy, deep, and long-drawn breathings which give such an impression of soupiness and strength. I stood leaning over the bulwarks, listening to the slow breathing of the mighty creatures until the low and regular swell seemed like the heaving of the ocean's mighty bosom to the sound of its own heavy and long-drawn respirations. Towards the evening of this day, Friday 7th, the fog cleared off, and we had every appearance of a cold blow. Soon after sundown, it came on. Snow, hail, and sleet were driving us most of the night, and the sea was breaking over the bows and covering the forward part of the little vessel. But as she would lay her course, the captain refused to heave her to. Sunday, November 9th. Today the sun rose clear and continued so until 12 o'clock, when the captain got an observation. This was very well for Cape Horn, and we thought it was little remarkable that, as we had not had one unpleasant Sunday during the whole voyage, and the only tolerable day here should be a Sunday. We got time to clear up the steerage and forecastle and set things to rights, and to overhaul our wet clothes a little. But this did not last very long. Between 5 and 6, the sun was then nearly 3 hours high. The cry of all starbow lines ahoy! All starbow lines ahoy! Summoned our watch on deck, and immediately all hands were called. A true specimen of Cape Horn was coming upon us. A great cloud of a dark slate color was driving on us from the southwest. We had our best to take in sail before we were in the midst of it. We had got the light sails furled, and we were just mounting the fore-rigging when the storm struck us. In an instant the sea, which had been comparatively quiet, was running higher and higher, and it became almost as dark as night. The hail and sleet were harder than I had yet felt them, seeming almost to pin us down to the rigging. We were longer taking in sail than ever before, for the sails were stiff and wet. The ropes and rigging covered the snow and sleet, and ourselves we ourselves cold and nearly blinded with the violence of the storm. By the time we had gone down upon the deck, the little brig was plunged madly into a tremendous head sea, which at every drive rushed in through the bow ports and over the bows, and buried all the forward parts of the vessel. At this instant the chief mate called out, "Lay out there and furl the jib!" This was no agreeable or a safe duty. Yet it must be done. John, a Swede, the best sailor on board, who belonged on the forecastle, sprang out upon the bowsprit. Another one must go. It was a clear case of holding back. I was near the mate, but sprang past several. The crew stood abaft the windlass and hauled the jib down, while John and I got upon the weather side of the jib boom, our feet on the foot ropes, holding on by the spar, the great jib flying off to leeward and slating so as almost to throw us off the boom. For some time we could do nothing but hold on, and the vessel, diving into huge seas one after the other, plunged us twice into the water upon to our chins. John thought the boom would go every moment, and called out to the mate to keep the vessel off and haul down the staysail. But the fury of the wind and the breaking of the seas against the bows defied every attempt to make ourselves heard, and we were obliged to do the best we could in our situation. Fortunately, no other seas so heavy struck her, and we succeeded in furling the jib after a fashion, and coming in over the staysail nettings, were not a little pleased to find that all was snug, and the watch gone below, for we were soaked through, and it was very cold. John admitted that it had been a post of danger, which good sailors seldom do when the thing is over. The weather continued nearly the same through the night. Monday, November 10th. During a part of this day we were hove to, but the rest of the time were driven on under close reefed sails, with a heavy sea, a strong gale, and frequent squalls of hail and snow. Tuesday, November 11th. The same. Wednesday, November 12th. The same. Thursday, November 13th. The same. We had now got hardened to Cape weather, and the vessel was under reduced sail and everything secured on deck and below, so that we had little to do but to steer and to stand over our watch. Our clothes were all wet through, and the only change was from wet to more wet. There is no fire in the forecastle, and we cannot dry clothes at the galley. It was in vain to think of reading or working below, for we were too tired. The hatchways were closed down, and everything was wet and uncomfortable, black, and dirt heaving and pitching. We had only to come below when the watch was out, wring our wet clothes, hang them to chafe against the bulkheads, and turn in and sleep as soundly as we could until our watch was called again. A sailor can sleep anywhere. No sound of wind, water, canvas, rope, wood, or iron can keep him awake, and we were always fast asleep when 3 blows on the hatchway. And the unwelcome cry of "All star bowlines ahoy! 8 bells there below! Do you hear the news?" roused us from our berth up on the cold, wet decks. The only time when we could be said to take any pleasure was at night and morning, when we were allowed a tin pot full of hot tea sweetened with molasses. This, bad as it was still warm and comforting, and together with our sea biscuits and cold salt beef made a meal. Yet even this meal was attended with some uncertainty. We had to go ourselves to the galley and take our kit of beef and tin pots of tea, and run the risk of losing them before we could get below. Many a kit of beef have I seen rolling in the scoopers, and the bearer lying in his length on the decks. I remember an English lad who was the life of the crew, whom we afterwards lost overboard, standing for nearly 10 minutes at the galley with his pot of tea in his hand, waiting for a chance to get down in the forecastle, and seeing that he thought was a smooth spell, started to go forward. He had just got to the end of the windlass when a great sea broke over the bows, and for a moment I saw nothing of him but his head and shoulders. At the next instant, being taken off his legs, he was carried off the sea, until her stern lifting up and sending the water forward, he was left high and dry at the end of at the side of the long boat, still holding on to his tin pot, which had now nothing in it but salt water. But nothing could ever daunt him or overcome for a moment his habitual good humor. Regaining his legs and shaking his fist at the man at the wheel, he rolled below, saying, "A man's no sailor if he can't take a joke." The ducking was not the worst of such an affair, for as there was an allowance of tea, you could get no more from the galley, though the others would never suffer a man to go without, but would always turn in a little from their own pots to fill up his. Something of the same kind befell me a few days after. The cook had just made for us a mess of hot scouse, that is, biscuit pounded fine, salt beef cut into small beef pieces, and a few potatoes boiled up together and seasoned with pepper. This was a rare treat, and I, being the last at the galley, had it put in my charge to carry down for the mess. I got along very well as far as the hatchway, and was just going down the steps when a heavy sea, lifting the stern out of the water and passing forward, dropping it again, threw the steps from their place, and I came down into the steerage a little faster than I meant to, with the kid on top of me, and the whole precious mess scattered over the floor. Whatever your feelings may be, you must make a joke of everything at sea. And if you were to fall from aloft and be caught in the belly of a snail, and thus saved from instant death, it would not do to look at all disturbed or to treat it as a serious matter. Friday, November 14th. We were now well to the southwestward of the Cape, and were changing our course to northward as much as we dared, since the strong southwest winds which prevailed then carried us in toward Patagonia. At 2 p.m. we saw a sail on our larboard beam, and at 4 we made it to be a large ship steering our course under single reef topsails. They ran down for us and answered our hail as the whale ship New England of Poughkeepsie, 120 days from New York. Our captain gave our name and added 92 days from Boston. They then had a little conversation about longitude, in which they found that they could not agree. The ship fell astern and continued in sight during the night. About 7:30, their whaleboat came alongside, and Captain Job Terry sprang on board, a man known in every port and by every vessel in the Pacific Ocean. He was about 6 feet high, wore thick cowhide boots and brown coat and trousers, and except a sunburnt complexion, had not the slightest appearance of a sailor. Yet he had been 40 years in the whale trade, and as he said himself, had owned ships, built ships, and sailed ships. His boat's crew were a pretty raw set, just out of the bush, and hadn't got the hayseed out of their hair. Captain Terry convinced our captain that our reckoning was a little out, and having spent the day on board, put off his boat at sunset for his ship, which was now 6 or 8 miles astern. One of the lads who came on his boat, a thoroughly countrified looking fellow, seemed to care very little about the vessel, rigging, or anything else, but went round looking at the livestock, and leaned over the pigsty, and said he wished he was back again tending his father's pigs. At 8 o'clock, we altered our course to the northward, bound for Juan Fernandez. This day, we saw the last of the albatrosses which had been our companions a great part of the time of the Cape, off the Cape. I had been interested in the bird from descriptions and Coleridge's poems, and was not at all disappointed. We caught one or two with a baited hook which was floated astern upon the shingle. Their long flapping wings, long legs, and large staring eyes gave them a very peculiar appearance. They looked well on the wing. But one of the finest sights that I have ever seen was an albatross asleep upon the water during a calm off Cape Horn. There being no breeze, the surface of the water was unbroken. but a long, heavy swell was rolling, and we saw the fellow, all white, directly ahead of us, asleep upon the waves, with his head under his wing, now rising on the top of one of the big billows, and then falling slowly until he was lost in the hollow between. He was undisturbed for some time, until the noise of our bows gradually approaching roused him. Lifting his head, he stared upon us for a moment. Then he spread his wide wings and took his flight.